I couldn't believe it. I had dedicated my entire life to the family business. Instead of passing the company down to me, my father secretly transferred 55% of it to my younger brother, a man who only cared about sketching absurd things on paper and had no real interest in the actual business. A week after I resigned, my father called me, panicked, saying we'd lost our biggest client. I simply said, "Let Jackson handle it." The look on his face was indescribable. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're watching from, and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, so we can begin with the injustice that came from within my own family. But in the end, I realized I needed to thank that very injustice. It was an ordinary Wednesday morning. I was reviewing the contract for the elementary school project in Lampasas when I got a call from Lisa, the head of administration, asking me to go down to the records room to check some legal documents at my father's request. I had no suspicion. It was standard procedure. The records room was in the basement, lit with cold neon light reflecting off rows of numbered cabinets. I opened cabinet 24 and pulled out a brown folder labeled Last September. When I turned the first page, I froze. Bold letters read, Share Transfer Agreement, Mitchell Architects. Transferor, Maverick Mitchell. Transferee, Jackson Mitchell. The document clearly stated that my father had transferred 55% of the company's ownership to my younger brother, signed in September, just 2 weeks after Jackson returned from Japan. My name wasn't there, not a single footnote, not one clause preserving any rights for me, the one who had dedicated a decade, rising from the lowest position. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Every board member had signed off. People I trusted, the same ones who once said, "Vivian is the backbone of the company." Turns out they all knew, except me. I remembered that exact time. I was burning myself out trying to resolve a legal crisis on the West Highway project, working through Thanksgiving, sleeping at the office for a week straight. And they quietly rearranged the company's entire future behind my back. As I walked upstairs with the file in my hand, the entire building fell into an eerie silence. I passed accounting and caught the gaze of Linda, who'd been here over 20 years. She looked at me, then quickly looked away. Too obvious. I returned to my office, shut the door, and placed the folder on my desk. Everything in front of me, the Golden Gate Bridge model, the coffee mug that read, Boss Lady, the bracelet my mother gave me in college, suddenly felt like mockery. My father's words echoed in my mind like a hollow chant. "You'll run this company. No one is more suited than you. All for our family's future." But in the end, all of it only held true until Jackson came back. That evening, my whole family gathered around the familiar oak dining table, the one where I had eaten hundreds of meals, believing I was an essential part of the so-called Mitchell legacy. Dinner was served like always: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, buttered toast. My mother still smiled softly as she poured wine for my father, while Jackson rambled on about an idea of blending art with construction, earning nods of approval for my father for its creativity. No one mentioned the contract. No one brought up the fact that I had just discovered I'd been excluded from everything that had been promised to me for over a decade. I sat there silently, listening to every word, as though I were a stranger who had stumbled into someone else's family dinner. When dessert was served, I placed the transfer documents on the table, without a word. The atmosphere grew heavy. My father cleared his throat, then gently set down his fork. "Vivian, this was a strategic decision," he said. I didn't reply, just looked him straight in the eyes. My mother stepped in, trying to stay composed. "You're still an irreplaceable part, but Jackson is the son." I clenched my fingers under the table. I had tripled company revenue in 3 years. I had modernized our entire operating system. I had sacrificed my personal life, friendships, love, and youth. And now, all of it was discarded for one reason: I wasn't a man. When I asked, "What about everything I've done?" my father replied, almost sermon-like, "You'll get married, have children. You'll be busy. I have to plan ahead." Jackson, the one who had just been handed 55% of the company without ever managing a single project, also spoke. I don't want to cause division, but maybe you don't realize what opportunity you're taking from someone else. I looked at my brother, then at my parents, and I knew, clearly, I was no longer family at this table. Not truly. And perhaps, I never was. I sat upright, took a long breath, and said with a calmness that surprised even me, I will no longer be working for this company. No one spoke for the first few seconds, only the clinking of silverware stopping, chairs creaking on the wooden floor. My mother blinked rapidly, and my father glared at me as if I had just uttered the most ungrateful thing in the world. You can't just walk away like this, he said. You know the company has major contracts. Our clients need you. I looked at him, then shook my head. It's Jackson's company now. That also means it's his responsibility. I stood up, placed my napkin on the table, my heart pounding but my mind crystal clear. I didn't need to prove anything anymore, and I knew that if I stayed, I would continue living under a ceiling full of cracks. That night, I drove back to my small apartment without music on. The night was painfully silent. The next morning, for the first time in 10 years, I didn't set an alarm. I woke up late, sat for hours on the sofa with a cup of cold coffee in hand, staring at the white wall in front of me. No work, no meetings, no assistant reminders. Just a void. I called William Barnes, my old university professor. After I finished telling him everything, he wasn't surprised. He simply said in a calm voice, "Write down everything you ever did for the company. Projects, systems, improvements. The more specific, the better. It's the only way to protect your true value." That night, I sat at my kitchen table and made a long list. From the East residential development to the AI-based cost auditing system I developed alone over 6 months, I wrote down every line, every milestone, but the most nuanced things, the ones rooted in instinct, experience, and crisis management, I kept in my head. Those can't be replicated, and I knew. No one could ever take them from me. The next day, I sent my resignation email. It was short, emotionless, and included notice that I'd be using all 8 weeks of my unused leave. I turned off my work phone, uninstalled internal software, and deleted my team chat account. That night, I returned to the office one last time, not to see anyone, but just to collect my things. My office looked the same, tidy, clean, exactly as I had left it just days ago. I gathered a few personal items, a framed photo of the family at our 2015 Christmas party, the first notebook I used when I started, and a drawing of a dream house Jackson had given me when he was 12. I looked one last time. The memories here, once a source of pride, had now become proof of a broken trust. I left the keys on the desk, gently closed the door, and didn't look back. On the drive home, the night breeze felt cooler than usual. Inside me, pain and a strange sense of liberation coexisted, as if I had just lost a family, but also reclaimed myself. In the first days after leaving the company, I no longer raced against a schedule. I began my mornings with slow walks around the park near my home, breathing deeply and letting the soft sunlight through the leaves ease a mind still raw with wounds. I brewed coffee by hand, had breakfast with toast and fruit, no longer eating while checking emails. Some days I attended a 9 a.m. yoga class, lying relaxed on a green mat, listening to soft music, as if reconnecting with my body for the first time in 10 years of pressure. My phone still rang. Jackson texted first. "Can you help me review the design for the factory project in Como?" Then my father. "Clients are asking about you. They need someone who understands the system." I read the messages, then locked the screen. No response. My mother called too, leaving a long, emotional voicemail, saying that family shouldn't fall apart over business. That, no matter what, you can't turn your back forever. But I knew. Those words weren't meant for me. They were for a daughter still sitting in the boardroom, still enduring and submitting as before. I deleted the message, not out of anger, but because I no longer felt the need to explain. I had spent too many years trying to prove my worth in a place unwilling to see it. Now, I just wanted to return to myself, to care for my body, my mind, and to slowly restore the belief that worth doesn't require recognition to exist. And this new path would begin in silence. That afternoon, while I was watering small pots on my balcony, the phone rang. A strange, but familiar number. It was Maxwell Anderson, one of the biggest clients I had directly managed for 3 consecutive years. He didn't mince words. "Vivian, I don't want to interfere in your family affairs, but Jackson's team isn't keeping up. The system's a mess. Reports are slow. Can you come back, at least during this critical phase?" I paused, then answered, "I understand the situation, but I no longer work for Mitchell Architects. I think you should consider other options, maybe externally, or rebuild your team." He hesitated, surprised. I didn't blame him. After all these years, he still saw me as an inseparable part of that company. But for the first time, I felt certain I no longer belonged to that name. After the call, I sat silently, staring at my untouched lemonade. My own words echoed in my head. I no longer work for Mitchell Architects. I had said them without trembling, without bitterness. And that made me realize, if someone like Maxwell Anderson still came to me, then my value didn't lie in a title or an office, but in me, in my knowledge, experience, vision, and the resilience I had built day by day. For the first time in weeks, I smiled genuinely. Maybe, somewhere out there, other doors would open. And this time, I would be the one choosing to walk through, without anyone's permission. That evening, my father called. For the first time, his voice no longer stern but filled with panic. He spoke quickly, almost whispering in tension. "Anderson is threatening to cancel the $21 million contract. Jackson can't handle it. The client wants you back." I replied, my voice steady and cold. "Jackson is the one in charge. That's his responsibility." He was silent for a few seconds, then hung up. 2 days later, my father came to my house, unannounced, no pretenses. He stood at the doorway, like a man who no longer held the power he was used to, and said, "Vivian, if you come back, I'll appoint you Chief Operating Officer. Triple the salary, everything you ever wanted." I didn't move, didn't smile. I simply said, "If I return, the only condition is 55% equity, along with voting rights and a board seat." He flinched, almost not believing what he had just heard. But I didn't waver. I didn't need another pretty title, only to be excluded from decisions. I needed real power, the kind that would keep me from being pushed out of the room just because I'm a woman. I added, "If you don't agree, I'll accept the offer from Westfield." That was our biggest competitor, who had been pursuing me for 2 weeks. His face darkened. He knew, if I joined them, he wouldn't just lose Anderson, but possibly an entire chain of strategic clients. I gave him a deadline. "You have 3 days." Then I stepped inside and closed the door without looking back. The next day, my mother called. Jackson texted, but I didn't answer. I knew clearly this was no longer a matter between parents and daughter. This was a negotiation. For the first time, I held the upper hand, and I wouldn't let emotions weaken that. For the first time in my life, I knew my worth, and I would not sell it short, not even once more. I met Garrett Westfield at a quiet cafe in downtown Austin. He arrived on time, polite, and got straight to the point. "Vivian, we'd like to offer you the role of Chief Operating Officer, with a clear pathway to CEO within 3 years. Equity will be unlocked in phases. No small talk, no flattery, no one saying, because you're a woman or because your family is well known. They chose me because I was qualified." I held the proposal packet and promised to respond within 2 days. When I got home, my mother was waiting at the steps. No makeup, none of her usual sharp tone, just a mother, with tired eyes and a much softer voice. "I'm sorry for not respecting what you've done." Your father, he's reconsidering your proposal. I listened without reacting. Part of me wanted to believe, the other part felt nothing but emptiness. It had been a long time since she called me daughter, without some managerial undertone. I turned my face away, not from anger, but because my heart stirred with a feeling both unfamiliar and aching. I'd been overlooked for so long that when someone finally saw me with respect, I didn't know how to receive it. And in that moment, memories returned like a midnight rain. I remembered when I was 16, giving up an architecture camp because my parents wanted me home for a family gathering. I remembered changing my thesis topic because my father insisted community architecture doesn't make money. And all the other times, I worked twice as hard, took on 3 times the responsibility, just for a nod of approval. I once believed that if I endured long enough, they would see. But that day never came. I had taught them to undervalue me, with my own quiet compliance. And now, I knew. If I took one more step back, there would be nothing left to hold on to. Whether my father agreed or not, I would stand by my original terms. Because if I don't stand firm for myself, no one else ever will. My father was perfectly punctual. 3 days had passed. I was enjoying a cup of coffee when a message appeared on my phone. 7 p.m. tonight, Riverfront Restaurant. I will respond to your proposal. It was from my father. Yes, I'll be there on time, I replied briefly. 2 hours before the meeting, I stood before my open wardrobe, my fingers gliding over button-down shirts that had long served as silent uniforms for an unspoken role. Tonight wasn't a company meeting, nor a family dinner. I chose a navy blazer dress, its sharp cut echoing the resolve I carried. On the lapel, I pinned a steel brooch in the shape of a diagonal line, a small symbol of something I once didn't dare to do: step off the path my family had laid out. I wore my hair down, wine-red lipstick, not to impress, but to remind myself I wasn't going there to be accepted, but to lay down terms. In the mirror, I looked deep into my own eyes and saw a woman who no longer needed anyone to acknowledge her efforts. I nodded softly to myself, as if saying, it's time to walk into that room without bowing my head. I locked the door, stepped into the night, and the cold wind brushed my skin like a reminder. There was no turning back. I entered Riverfront Restaurant, the place where my father often brought partners to close million-dollar deals. The table was set in a corner, with soft candlelight, crisp white linens, every detail in place as if this, too, were a business negotiation. My mother sat to the right, Jackson to the left, and my father across from me, just the way he liked it. Everything within reach, under control. No one spoke for the first few minutes, only the clinking of cutlery and soft jazz playing in the background. Finally, my father broke the silence. We can renegotiate. But 55% equity, that's too much. I put my glass down and replied calmly, it's not about the number. It's the position I deserve. Jackson jumped in. I'm not useless. I didn't refute him, not because I agreed, but because I was tired of justifying what was already true. My father leaned in. I can appoint you as co-director. High salary, signing authority up to $5 million. I gave a slight smile. I've already turned down a better offer from Westfield. That line sliced through the room. My mother turned to my father. He straightened, his tone sharper. You'd really go work for our competitor? I answered evenly. Family doesn't cut a daughter out of the legacy she helped build. After dessert, I stood up. If no one here believes I'm worth 55%, then I don't want any share at all. I'll walk away, not because I lack ownership, but because trust is already gone. I walked out of the restaurant, the wind from the river cutting cold but peaceful. I didn't look back, because tonight I had walked away from the past. And this time, no one could pull me back with empty promises. I returned home after dinner, took off my shoes, hung up my coat, and sat motionless by the window as if I'd just survived a silent storm. Outside, the city lights had begun to glow. Inside, there was only me, and questions no one else could answer. I could sign Westfield's offer, step into a high-ranking role immediately, backed by power and prestige I'd once dreamed of. But I knew deep down, Mitchell Architects may have betrayed me, but it was also where I began. Working for a direct competitor to the family business, even as revenge, went against the principles I had once set for myself. The next morning, I called Garrett Westfield, thanked him for the offer, and declined. I gave no justification, sought no understanding. I simply said, I need to build something of my own, from scratch. 3 weeks later, I moved to New York, carrying a single suitcase, a laptop, and one desire: to build an AI-integrated architecture platform that allowed structures to adapt in real time to need and climate. I joined a startup of just 7 people, sharing office space with a delivery company. The first months were filled with instant noodles, chasing investor calls, and more rejections than promises. In the first 3 months, our team took on a flexible design project for a small hotel chain. The contract barely topped $100,000, but constant changes nearly broke us. Some nights I sat alone, rewriting the entire light simulation algorithm, because if we missed the deadline, the client would walk. 8 months later, we landed our first major contract, a $3 million residential complex in Pennsylvania. Joy mixed with anxiety. In the first week of execution, our AI system glitched, proposing flawed structural layouts that almost cost us the deal. I flew out personally, re-explained the system's logic, asked for one more week, and manually verified every input. In the end, the project was completed on time. And for the first time, we were featured in an industry publication. 1 year after founding, we reached 20 employees and signed a $7 million contract with a mid-tier construction group. We were no longer a promising young company. We were being called something else, a serious competitor. I worked without pause. Some nights I fell asleep at my desk. Once I collapsed and had to get IV fluids in the conference room, but I never stopped. Because I wasn't doing this to fight anyone. I was doing it to prove to myself that I could. 2 years later, we secured a $36 million contract to build a smart office complex in Chicago. By then, we were no longer a startup. We were a sought-after platform. I was appointed CEO and became the majority shareholder, not because my name was Mitchell, but because I had been there from the first sketch, through every line of code, through every near failure we didn't let destroy us. Meanwhile, in Texas, Mitchell Architects slowly declined. Jackson couldn't retain clients. The systems I once built had been altered. The processes I once optimized were abandoned. Within 3 years, the company faced cancellations, damage payouts, and ultimately filed for bankruptcy. I learned about it through a quiet email from an old contractor. I read it while sitting in my usual cafe in Brooklyn. I felt no glee, no sorrow. I simply closed my laptop. Some debts, time will collect on its own, and some endings, you don't need to write yourself. One summer afternoon, I returned to Kerr County to meet with a local construction partner, a collaboration worth nearly $12 million, part of my company's expansion into the southern states. The meeting was held at a small hotel, not far from the neighborhood where I had once grown up. After the contract was signed, I stepped out of the conference room feeling a mix of relief and quiet. No one in that room knew I was once the daughter of the owner of Mitchell Architects, and I didn't need them to. On the way to the airport, my car passed a familiar street, the one with the 2-story house, white fence, wooden steps, and the large oak tree in front. I asked the driver to stop, but when I stepped out, I froze. The house no longer belonged to my family. A foreclosure notice was taped to the window. The yard was overgrown, weeds knee-high, the fence broken. A small bank sign posted at the gate stood like a period at the end of a sentence, marking the close of a past once polished by reputation and wealth. I texted Emily, a cousin who lived nearby. A few minutes later, she replied, "Your parents moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Eastview. After the company went bankrupt, they sold nearly everything to cover breach of contract penalties." A truth so simple, it felt hollow. I stared at the message, then sat quietly in the car. My return flight to New York was scheduled for that evening, but for some reason, my hand opened the airline app and pressed cancel. Something inside me needed to see it for myself, to see what their lives had become, to see whether they were still the parents I once knew, or if they had truly changed. It wasn't an apology I was after. It was clarity. Was there still anything between us worth calling family? That evening, I stood in front of an old one-story building, smaller than the old family home's storage shed, its yellow paint peeling, apartment numbers handwritten. I rang the doorbell. My mother answered, her eyes startled, then quickly softening into quiet surprise. "Would you like to come in for dinner?" she asked. I nodded. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms. The living room held a tiny dining table by the window. The kitchen was cramped but clean. No more wine cabinets, no rosewood shelves or luxury sofas. But somehow it felt lighter, easier to breathe, as if the collapse had stripped away the pressure and left only what was real. During dinner, my father set his fork down, not looking at me, but at the space between us on the table. He spoke slowly, each word clear. "I was wrong to think you were just a part of my plan. I was blind, and too convinced Jackson would succeed, just because he's a man." He raised his eyes, no longer defensive. "I'm sorry for not seeing you as your own person, not just a replica of someone else." I said nothing. I looked at him, then around the room, saw my mother gently stacking dishes, not interrupting like she used to. The two of them, no longer speaking over each other, no longer presenting as a single, unshakable unit. They weren't wealthy anymore. But perhaps, for the first time, they were simply themselves. And maybe, for the first time, they saw me as my own person too, not just an extension of the family's expectations. I said goodbye as I left my parents' apartment that same evening. No hugs, no tears, just a calm exchange of glances, as if between us there was now a quiet understanding, with no need for more words. My mother handed me a small bag. Inside were a few ginger cookies she had baked herself, the kind I used to love in elementary school. My father stood by the door, didn't say much, only nodded. But in that nod, and in his eyes, there might have been more than all the words he had said to me in the past 10 years. I walked down the steps, got into the car, and drove away from that quiet neighborhood just as the clock struck 10. Instead of waiting at the airport, I booked a small hotel nearby, 8th floor, with a window facing the highway and the soft stretch of yellow streetlights like a ribbon of memory. The night sky wasn't fully dark. It was a gentle gray, still and calm like myself, for the first time in a very long while. When the elevator doors opened and I stepped into the room, my phone lit up. A message from my mother. She wrote, "Jackson has gone back to painting. He has a small gallery on the north side of the city. After the company collapsed, he's been living quietly. I think he regrets it. Truly regrets it. He knows he wasn't capable, but he took the role anyway, and it ruined everything. He said if he could turn back time, he would have refused from the beginning. But now he doesn't have the courage to say 3 simple words to you. I'm sorry." I read the message 3 times. I didn't cry, but my chest tightened. Not from sadness, but from the realization that I wasn't the only one who stepped out of the dark. Maybe we all carry a quiet piece of regret. Only difference is some dare to face it, and some still don't. And sometimes, the apologies left unspoken are the most honest of all. On the flight back to New York the next afternoon, I sat by the window, watching clouds drift by like folded layers of memory. Last night's conversation was unlike any I'd ever had with my parents. No scolding, no defensiveness, no avoidance, just recognition. Late, but real. And what surprised me most was that I wasn't angry anymore. I hadn't forgiven. But I was no longer held hostage by old wounds. I had stepped out of their shadow long ago, but only now, seeing them stripped of power, of wealth, of commanding voices, did I realize I wasn't the only one who had changed. Maybe sometimes it's loss that reveals who we truly are. When my father was no longer the boss, he began to listen. When my mother no longer lived in a house with everything, she began to speak kindly. I once thought losing wealth was a tragedy. But looking back, I see now, when people stop using money to mask pain, they start thinking differently about others and about themselves. As for me, I no longer need their validation. I've learned to see myself through my own eyes, not through the reflection in anyone else's. Leaving my family didn't diminish me, it made me stronger. I've learned to set boundaries, to say no, to stay silent when needed and speak up when it matters. I am no longer the daughter struggling to be recognized. I am a woman who stepped out of the mold and doesn't wait for applause. The plane began to descend. I looked out at the city below, a place where dreams aren't easy, but they're real. A place where I once began again, with no business card, no legacy, just one belief: I will never let myself be small again. What do you think about the way I handled my family's crisis? If it were you, how would you respond? Before diving into more gripping stories about family, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. It means the world to me.